Hey, it's Max from UNFTR for the Midas Touch Network. Remember this? Because I think it's important.
I love tariffs. Most beautiful word. But I'm not allowed to say that anymore. I said tariff is my favorite word. I love the word tariff. You know, we're becoming rich as hell.
Oh, Donald. Donald had his toy taken away from him this week, and he's so mad about it. And all he was trying to do was just be a good boy.
I want to be a good boy.
So now apparently the whole world has to pay the price because Donald Trump's hand-selected Supreme Court didn't vote his way on this one issue. So we have a lot to cover because this was just the icing on the cake of what was a monumentally bad week for the Donald and, of course, for us by extension. So we're going to cover tariffs as our main story, but also 5 massive and very ugly data releases that are not to be believed when you put them all together. So yeah, bad week for the Donald, but we're going to make sense of it all in this week's Macro Take, exclusively for the Midas Touch Network. All right, so like I said, we're going to start with our top story, and then we'll get into the 5 big data points from the week that show how the cracks are really beginning to appear everywhere in the economy. So obviously, we're talking tariffs. Now, to put this in perspective, I want to share a little anecdote that pretty much sums up Trump's entire life. Now, some people cite this like it's urban legend, but this is documented. A few years ago, the New York Times did a forensic analysis of Trump's inheritance and then translated it into today's dollars. But then Forbes went one step further and did the math on what his inheritance would have been worth had he invested it into the S&P 500 and didn't file for Chapter 11 times. So anyway, they confirmed as of the 2021 article that they put out, that I'll link in the notes, that he would have been worth way more if he had just left it alone and put it in the stock market. And I think that says it all about the Donald, and I'm going to prove it today. There is nothing that this guy can't ruin. So, to begin, he promised trillions of dollars in tariff revenue, only to post about $260 billion for all of 2025. So again, some perspective here. That is up from about $98 billion in 2024. So not bad, right? And you can see here that it's one of the largest revenue sources for the government, now outpacing corporate taxes through the first 4 months of the fiscal year. Remember, the fiscal year begins in October. So at this pace, we are on target, or we would have been, to collect about $350 billion in tariff revenue. Now, if you want additional perspective, if you put up the entire year of tariff revenue collected for the US government, it amounts to about 1/3 of Amazon's total annual revenue. Now, Scott Bessent, not worried. Neither is Trump for that matter, but they are mad. And they're going to get their way anyway because they have ways of putting on the tariffs.
I can tell you that the total amount of revenue that Treasury will collect this year will be little changed.
The good news is that there are methods, practices, statutes, and authorities as recognized by the entire court in this terrible decision, and also as recognized by Congress, which they refer to, that are even stronger than the IEEPA tariffs available to me as President of the United States.
So let's break down what the Supreme Court actually said, what the options are for the administration going forward, and then address the enormous white elephant in the room. Do they have to give the money back? All right, so the decision itself. Here's what happened in plain English. Trump invoked something called IEEPA, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, to slap these sweeping tariffs on practically everything coming into this country, even though a lot of people found ways around it, but that's for a different day. So IEEPA was designed to let presidents respond fast to foreign threats, usually through asset freezes and targeted sanctions. So think freezing a dictator's bank account, not blowing up the entire global trade architecture. Now, the majority of the court, and we'll get to the dissenters in a moment, said, look, the Constitution gives Congress the power to levy taxes and duties. IEEPA does not clearly give the president the authority to reimagine the entire tariff schedule with unlimited amounts, unlimited duration, and unlimited scope just by declaring a national emergency. So they applied what's called the major questions doctrine, which basically says if you're doing something with enormous economic and political consequence, you have to get congressional authorization. And IEEPA doesn't provide that. So the emergency tariffs on Canada and China and Mexico and that island of penguins, broad swaths of global imports, totally struck down. Now, the tariffs imposed under other statutes like Section 232, which deals with national security, those can stay in place. So this isn't a complete wipeout, but it is a significant blow. Now, the dissenters, and it's worth noting this, they argued that IEEPA was deliberately written to be broad. Congress wanted the executive branch to have a fast, powerful tool to respond to foreign economic threats. And historically, the courts have given the political branches pretty wide deference on foreign affairs and national security. And so the dissent also warned that the majority was effectively rewriting IEEPA and importing the major questions doctrine into territory where it doesn't belong, sort of second-guessing the president on what constitutes an economic emergency, which they see as a political question, not a legal one. What makes this especially delicious, though, is that Trump spent years stacking this particular court for these exact circumstances. These are his people, but the majority still said, no, don't do it this way. Now, before you think this is over, though, it really isn't, because Trump came out swinging almost immediately, announcing a blanket 10% tariff on the world. So the administration has already signaled, and they have for a long time, that they have a legal playbook for what comes next. So basically, they're going to use very specific provisions within IEEPA, the parts that deal with the targeted country-by-country designations, to put temporary tariffs on individual nations working through the mechanism country by country. So is it more arduous and slower and more cumbersome? Without a doubt. But they're committed to pressing this agenda and working around Congress. Now, the White House is not going to back down on this. They're just going to do it the hard way, like somebody who keeps getting kicked out of the casino through the front door and then sneaking back in through the kitchen.
I want to be a good boy.
But now here's the white elephant in the room, which is not totally settled because it's going back to the lower courts. So here's the issue. If the tariffs were beyond statutory authority, that means they're void. And if they're void, that means the duties collected under them are theoretically vulnerable. They're just sort of sitting in this purgatory, in this limbo. And the people that paid these import taxes, they want that money back. So analysts are floating refund exposure in the range of $100 to $175 billion. Now, it won't happen overnight. It's going to be slow and contested, but the direction of travel is pretty clear here. And here's where it gets politically brutal for Trump. The entire tariff regime was supposed to be a revenue engine to help offset the hemorrhaging caused by Trump's corporate and upper-class tax cuts. That was the pitch. Tariffs would fund the government so the wealthy could get their breaks, and we'd get so much money that we could even get a tariff dividend. Please. So now that the revenue pipeline is not only under threat, the administration may have to actually pay that money back. In theory, and likely in practice, this will blow an even bigger hole in the deficit. And now for the screw job. The odd man out is once again us, the American people, because multiple independent studies have already confirmed concretely that the tariff costs were passed directly to consumers. Prices went up. You paid them. Now, if these companies get their money back, it's not like you're getting a rebate. Nothing even close to that. The shareholders will. Trump launched a tariff regime that increased inflation, and then we absorbed it as consumers. Now it's going to blow an even bigger hole in the budget when the refunds come due. It shredded trade alliances with our closest allies. It forced the world to start reordering global supply chains around us and not in our favor. But had he literally done nothing, if he sat on his hands and he just made his little tiny hand truth social posts and he played with the Kennedy Center and ate his Big Macs on his jet, we would have been better off by every measurable economic standard. But since he's out of ideas, he's going to do it all over again. I mean, bankrupt one company, why not rinse, repeat, and do it 10 more times? Is anyone sensing a pattern here? While we're on the subject of things that cost you money, let's talk about the PCE. That's the Personal Consumption Expenditure, the price index that the Federal Reserve prefers as its measure of inflation. Now, you normally hear most often about CPI, but PCE is what the Fed actually uses to calibrate monetary policy. So, the December release, also not good news. Inflation continues to creep, and here's how this index works. PCE covers about 65% services, which is housing, healthcare, transportation, financial services, and so on, and about 35% goods. So it's a broad